RubberGard EPDM SA with secure bond technology. Approved substrates must be clean, dry, and free of foreign materials such as grease and any debris which could inhibit adhesion. This may require cleaning with a broom or blower. Only install as much insulation that can be made watertight during that working day. Membrane positioning and installing the field sheet. Install RubberGard EPDM SA with secure bond technology only when membrane, substrate, and ambient temperatures exceed 20 degrees Fahrenheit, -7 degrees Celsius. Unroll and position the EPDM SA membrane over the substrate to achieve the desired alignment and overlaps. Allow the membrane to relax a minimum of 30 minutes before final positioning and adhering. Position adjoining sheets in a manner that the untaped lap seam area along the length of the EPDM SA membrane overlap a minimum of 3 inches for the application of quick seam 3-inch splice tape. End laps and cut EPDM SA membrane panels can be butted together. Position all sheets so that the seams are in shingle fashion so as not to buck water, or run perpendicular to the flow of water. Do not butterfly the membrane to remove the release liner. Doing so may cause air to be trapped. Instead, secure the membrane in its position before removing the release liner. Once the membrane has relaxed in place for a minimum of 30 minutes and the seam positions are aligned, carefully fold back the leading edge of the EPDM SA membrane at one end to expose the release liner without disturbing the original position of the membrane. Starting from the center split of the exposed release liner, remove the liner on both sides of the split at a 45-degree angle back beyond the EPDM SA membrane's edge, making sure to have pulled enough of the release liner to hold below the membrane. Remove approximately 5 feet minimum of release liner from one end of the membrane sheet and adhere it to the substrate. The release liner removed should be enough to extend out beyond the edges of the EPDM SA membrane. Keeping the EPDM SA membrane flat and secure and the seam overlap aligned, continue removing the release liner at a 45-degree angle along the length of the entire sheet up to 100 feet. Pulling the release liner at a higher angle can cause the membrane sheet to move and may trap air. The 2 halves of the release liner should be pulled away at the same time by 2 people, making sure to keep the release liner as close to the roof surface as possible during removal. Note: removal of the liner and any handling of the exposed SA adhesive should be done by 2 people minimum. To initiate adhesion, use a stiff bristle broom and positive downward pressure to broom in the installed EPDM SA membrane. Begin brooming in the middle of the membrane, working your way toward one end. Repeat the process toward the other end. Push the broom in the direction of the short dimension of the sheet to avoid creating wrinkles in the sheet. After brooming, roll the installed EPDM SA membrane panel with a weighted roller, linoleum roller, or similar device, 5 pounds per linear inch of pressure, in the same manner as it was broomed. EPDM SA membrane must be rolled with a weighted roller to achieve a final bond to the substrate. However, if the substrate is IsoGuard HD or Resista, do not roll in with roller. Make sure the seam overlap with the next sheet is a minimum of 3 inches and is clean of all dirt and contaminants, and there is no moisture present on the mating surfaces. Preparing and seaming along untaped length of membrane. Fabricate seam along the untaped seaming edge of RubberGard EPDM SA with secure bond technology. Stir the Firestone primer thoroughly before using. Appropriate primers for this application are Quick Prime Plus, Quick Prime Plus LVOC, Single Ply Quick Prime Primer, and Single Ply LVOC Primer. Do not thin. A minimum of 2 minutes of vigorous hand mixing with a wooden paint stirrer, or its equivalent, is required. Fold the top membrane back to measure locations of edge of primer and edge of tape. Mark the bottom membrane a 1/2 inch beyond the edge of the top membrane using the marker supplied with quick seam splice tape to allow for a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch of tape exposure from the finished seam. Use the provided quick scrubber pad and handle to apply the primer. Dip the pad into the primer and allow it to saturate with primer. Use a back and forth motion along the mating surfaces. Apply the primer to both top and bottom seaming surfaces thoroughly, without streaks or puddles, at the application rate of 200 square feet per gallon. Do not overwork the primer or cause globs or irregularities. Firestone primer is required on both mating surfaces. Provided the membrane is new and clean, separate cleaning prior to primer application is not necessary when using the quick scrubber pad and handle to apply the primer to the membrane seaming areas. Allow the primer to dry. Use the finger push method to determine when the primer is sufficiently flashed off. Position the 3-inch quick seam tape on the bottom primed surface using the marks as guides. Use a 2-inch silicone hand roller or broom to mate the tape to ensure secure contact. Place the membrane over the seam tape. Remove the seam tape release liner at a 45-degree angle and as low to the roof as possible. Use a 2-inch silicone-coated rubber hand roller to hand roll the entire seam at an angle toward the outer seam edge. Make sure there is sufficient contact between the membrane and the seam tape. Preparing and seaming membrane, end laps, and cut edges. The short edge of the RubberGard EPDM SA with Secure Bond technology panels should be butted together. To fabricate the butt joint seam, prime the area to receive the quick seam batten or quick seam flashing center strip using Firestone primer. The primed area should be wider than the quick seam batten strip or flashing. After the primer flashes off, apply 6-inch quick seam batten or 5-inch quick seam flashing center strip, just as you would the seam tape previously discussed. Apply T-joint covers to all intersections of 3 intersecting sheets using primer, quick seam T-joint covers, and lap sealant HS per current detail. Lap sealant HS should also be applied around edges of quick seam batten strip or flashings per current detail. These butt joints can also be covered with 6-inch seam tape and standard EPDM membrane cut to size. Vertical application. RubberGard EPDM SA with Secure Bond technology can be used as a vertical flashing, parapet walls, transition walls, roof curbs, etc. Position the EPDM SA membrane at the base of the vertical substrate. Score the release liner at the transition angle before removing the release liner. Remove the release liner from the EPDM SA membrane by rolling the membrane up the substrate without wrinkles or trapped air and extending over the top of the substrate in accordance with the requirements of the appropriate Firestone termination detail. Seaming of the EPDM SA membrane is the same procedure as all Firestone EPDM membranes. 3-inch Firestone seam tape should be used as well as all Firestone quick seam products. Firestone Building Products. Nobody covers you better. For more information, visit firestonebpco.com.